It's good to see each one this evening. We're talking tonight about the record of the rocks, which is my favorite subject. When I went through school, I found out there are a lot of people in the universities that don't believe what the Bible says. And their challenges to our faith in most of the disciplines that we see in the state universities today. And it appeared to me that the area where we really needed help was in the area of geology. And I didn't know a creationist who was a geologist at the time. And if we were going to have answers, I needed to know what I was talking about. And so we went back to school and tried to prepare ourselves in that area. We're talking about the rocks, and not just the rocks in general, the sedimentary rocks we're concerned about tonight. And those are rocks that are laid down by water, and we find them covering the continents to an average depth of about 1.5 miles over the continents. There are some areas where you don't find sedimentary rocks. There's some areas where there's more, but on the average, about 1.5 miles covering the continents. Now, how did that happen? The evolutionist says it was slow and gradual. I think, no, it was, I account for it a different way. Interestingly, when they look at Mars, and we talked about this, I believe it was last evening, Discoverer points out, 2018, that it was catastrophic floods that rapidly carved the surface of Mars because they see these sedimentary rocks. And here in nature, this is 2020, Mars Noachic stratigraphic record. Yep, there are the sedimentary rocks. But there they see no water. Here we've got the surface of the earth covered. 70% of the surface of the earth is covered with water. Now, how do we account for these sedimentary rocks laid down by water to an average depth of 1.5 miles, covering the continents? They're full of billions and billions of dead things. The evolutionist says this was a slow, gradual process that can be read like a book, and we go back through time and we see the process of evolution. That sounds like a pretty powerful argument if you see evolution reflected there. On the other hand, I think it's better explained in a rapid series of catastrophes over a year's time caused by the flood. All of the founders of the discipline of geology believed that the flood accounted for these layers, as we do today when we look at Mars. But we're going to look at the two alternatives, see which one fits the facts best. The evolutionist says this represents what you find when you dig down in the earth. It's supposed to be the record of the evolution of life through time, and it gets simpler and simpler as you go lower and lower. The biggest problem with that representation, not just that it would require millions of years, we saw last night doesn't really fit the record, you can't dig down in the earth and find that anywhere, which is a serious problem. The complete picture you see, but it's only in the textbooks. And that's the only place you can find that complete detailed picture. Now, at the same time, I think there is a general order, not the specific detailed order that you see here, but generally speaking, you see things that lived at the bottom of the ocean at the bottom of the column. And the things that lived higher successively are seen because that's how it was buried in the flood. So we don't throw that out entirely, but it's certainly not the picture that you see in the textbooks. Consider the description by Leighton Judson's Physical Geology. Because we cannot find sedimentary rocks representing all of Earth time neatly in one convenient area, which is, of course, what this column represents. We cannot find that in any convenient area. Because of that, we must piece together the rock sequence from locality to locality. This process of tying one rock sequence in one place to another in some other place is known as correlation. So it is correlated. We get some from here and some from there, maybe from China, from Canada, and then piece it together, and that's how you get the column, not by just digging down anywhere on the face of the earth. So that this is a construct. As we read in the Encyclopedia Britannica, the end product of correlation is a mental abstraction called the geologic column. It's not concrete, so to speak. It's not what you see in the earth, but a mental abstraction, a construct. And the construction is based, of course, on the thing to be proved. They turn around and use it for proof, which it really isn't. Notice R.H. Rastle's commenting, he's from Cambridge, writing in Encyclopedia Britannica. It cannot be denied that geologists are here arguing in a circle. A succession of organisms has been determined by a study of their remains embedded in the rocks, and the relative ages of the rocks are determined by the organisms they contain. Now we can simplify that this way. Here's a person who says, we've got a primitive fossil here. Okay, how do you know that's a primitive fossil? Well, it's found in an old rock. Okay, that makes sense, I understand that, but now how do you know that's an old rock? Well, it's got a primitive fossil in it, you see. Round and round you go. It's not proving anything, but illustrating the thought process. The question is, do you find progressions in the rock? I think you find a reflection of exactly what the flood would do, but the kind of progression that the evolutionist requires is not there. Notice from New Scientist, David Rapp, who's curator, Dean of Science, Field Museum of Natural History, the largest fossil museum we have in the United States. He says in the years after Darwin, his advocates hoped to find predictable progressions, which is what's represented in that geologic column. In general, these have not been found. Now, this is not a lightweight. He's the curator and dean of science at the Field Museum of Natural History. He knows what he's talking about. He says, yet the opinion has died hard and some pure fantasy has crept into the textbooks. And I believe that's what we're talking about when we look at this detailed, ordered progression. It is skewed, very dramatically skewed. And one of the questions the other evening helped point that out. We see the animals with backbones. We see the vertebrates mainly dominating, and of course a lot of dinosaurs. But it's mostly vertebrates. It's mostly marine invertebrates because I think it's a flood deposit. And that's exactly what you would expect. 95% marine invertebrates. Of the 5% left, 4.5% are plants and algae. There's actually about 1/100th of 1% that are vertebrates, which is mostly what you see in the geologic column. Now that's dramatically skewed, and of that 1/100th percent, most of those are fish, which again is not what you see in the column. I think a flood deposit is a better explanation. This was the explanation that was promoted by the book Genesis Flood, which actually began the creation movement in America, published in '61. There were others, of course, who were creationists, but they didn't really understand it in terms of geology. John C. McCampbell, who is an evolutionist, but very fair-mindedly, wrote the foreword to this for Whitcomb and Morris, who were the authors. He's head of the Geology Department at the University of Southeastern Louisiana. And he acknowledged in the preface that the facts of geology do fit this view. Now, sometimes people will say, well, a flood would just jumble everything up. No, a flood doesn't do that. Water is one of the most effective sorting agents ever. And here is an enemy that says the facts do fit. And I think that'll become obvious as we proceed. They have presented a strong case, he says, and a serious challenge to the naturalistic view. Now, that was done in '61. We've learned a good deal since then, and a more recent update was done by the son of one of the authors, John Morris. The Global Flood, one I highly recommend. It's written maybe senior high, first year college level, and it does a good job of explaining what we see and in terms of a flood. But the evolutionist says, no, it was this gradual process. It's skewed in their representation. It is a conceptual correlation. It's not what you find when you dig down in the earth. And it's useless as proof of evolution. Why? Because you're assuming the thing to be proved in order to build it. And then having assumed it, which you must do in order to build this pretty picture, you can't turn around and then prove that which you have questioned in the first place. It is useful, however, as a model. It illustrates the thinking, and if evolution is true, you ought to find this kind of thing. So here's the idea. It's assumed and then illustrated. Okay, does it fit? And are there contradictions? And there shouldn't be if they're separated by millions of years. If it's a general flood deposit, there might be some exceptions, but generally speaking, it would be useful as a test. Well, how would you test it? Let's let the evolutionist describe how that should be done. Stephen Stanley of Johns Hopkins University, one of the better known paleontologists in the United States, says topsy-turvy fossils would be the way to test it. In other words, you say you believe in evolution. Well, this simple animal ought to be down toward the bottom. If you find things that are supposed to be at the bottom at the top, things that are supposed to be at the top at the bottom, then you've got a problem. Topsy-turvy fossils. That would disprove evolution. Any topsy-turvy sequence of fossils would force us to rethink our theory. Well, in terms of the things that are supposed to be down found up, that they're not really interested in that because it's not that uncommon. We find that all the time. And they don't really answer it. They just don't look there because it is common. For example, with the horseshoe crab, and here is a description of it from Nature, 2021. We try to keep these up to date. But they're describing it. The oldest actual fossil of the horseshoe crab to date is the Ordovician period, 450 million years ago. Now that's pretty much toward the bottom of the column. And remarkably, extant species remain relatively unchanged morphologically. That's the shape. Since this extremely ancient date. So 450 million years right down at the bottom, and they haven't changed. That's not what they expect. Niles Eldridge, curator of the American Museum of Natural History in New York, wrote the book Fossils. He says there seems to have been almost no change in any part we can compare. We've not completely solved the riddle of living fossils. That is, the thing supposed to be at the bottom, at the top. We see it. Keith Thompson, president of the Academy of Natural Sciences, is describing the problem in his book, Living Fossils. The first members of this group look quite like modern forms. The one you see up top was swimming around last year. The one at the bottom, 400 million years old, wow, they look very much the same, don't they? the last fossils became extinct about 50 million years ago. Now, wait a minute. Fossils became extinct. What he means is that 50 million years down from the top, you find no more. They went extinct, except they're all over the place. We've got them living everywhere, which is an even bigger problem. They're supposed to have gone extinct 50 million years ago, but they're alive. So here is that which is supposed to be at the bottom, up at the top. That's a topsy-turvy fossil, which falsifies the extinction process. The idea that you don't find it above this point. Here's where it stops in the column, and then we've got the time above it. But they're still alive. That means that not finding it above that point doesn't prove it's extinct. And we've got dozens of examples of that. Interestingly, just 2021, perfectly preserved 310 million year old fossilized brain of a horseshoe crab. Researchers surprised they found the ancient brain remarkably similar to a modern horseshoe head. It's all the same. And there are other very interesting things about the crab that we're tempted to talk about, we'll forget for now. But here is that which is supposed to be down found up. The real test, though, they tell us, is the opposite. What's supposed to be up found down. Now, if it hadn't evolved, it didn't evolve till up near the top, then how do you find it down? Well, you couldn't. You see, that would really be a test. This was what we'll call the turvy fossil. Notice Richard Dawkins and his description of that potential find. He said we should be very surprised, for example, to find humans appearing in the record before mammals are supposed to have evolved. Our whole modern theory of evolution would be utterly destroyed. In Newsweek, he said evolution could be so easily disproved if a single fossil turned up in the wrong date order. Well, we found a whole lot more than a single one, and he looks the other way. The discovery of even a single fossil in the wrong geological stratum would destroy it. Well, just to give you a preview, here is a single, more than a single. It's 11 modern men that are found near LaSalle, Utah, in the same rock with the dinosaurs. Supposed to be 100 million years ago, 110 million in this deposit. It's the same layer that you find at Dinosaur National Monument, one of the layers there, in the Dakota sandstone, and they're modern humans. Now that's in the wrong date order. That's exactly what he said would utterly destroy, and that's his conclusion of the implications. It would utterly destroy. Well, that can't be, and so his explanation is it's an intrusional burial. They fell down a crack, which he sees no evidence of, or they were, it was a mine cave-in. They'd climb back in a cave. Well, there are 11 individuals. 4 of them are female. One of them is an infant. There are no tools, and there are no broken bones. It doesn't sound like a mine cave-in, does it? No indication of that at all. We went back to that site. This is near LaSalle, Utah, just below Moab. And 50 feet down in the Dakota sandstone, where the backhoe is there, is where these skeletons were found, down in the Dakota sandstone. This one is articulated, that is, like it was in life. Most of them are just washed into place. But you can see the knee up at the top, the right hand side, the hip, and the toe over toward the bottom left. That's a human. Here are other bones that may look like they're together, but they're just washed into place. This one I just took out. It's most of them replaced with malachite, as you can see, very green. Just washed it off, and it's just as modern as it can be. We've had it tested at the Pound Human Identification Laboratory. Perfectly modern human. Not a recent burial since they were replaced with malachite. That takes maybe 1,000 years. There's no collagen. It takes about 1,000 for the collagen to disappear. And we've done the testing to determine that. Certainly not a recent burial. But there's his exception, the exact thing that he called for. And he just says, well, it's a mine cave-in, and ignores it with no evidence of that at all. Some of it is very interesting. Here's jewelry-grade turquoise that's completely replaced down with the dinosaurs. So that's a turvy fossil, that which would utterly destroy, according to Mr. Dawkins himself. It would disprove evolution, is his term. In the same article that we're quoting from here, actually in the Blind Watchmaker, his book, he goes on to talk about some of the dinosaur footprints that we've spent time working with at Glen Rose. He says, ironically, it's also the reason why creationists are so keen on the fake human footprints, because they like the bones. And you would think, okay, bones are much better evidence, except that's really not the case when you're dealing with evolutionists who are looking for a way out. The bones can be intrusionally buried, eroded, redeposited. That's conceivable. You can't do that with footprints, can you? They're eroded, they're gone. So they are where they're at, and you eliminate the intrusional burial possibility. But creationists were keen on that. They carved them during the Depression to fool tourists, dinosaur beds of Texas. He didn't see that happening. That's his explanation. I think we can answer that. But we go to the Dinosaur Valley State Park, where we see hundreds of dinosaur tracks. It's famous for that. This is the Paluxy River. And it's interesting. You can sit your child in the middle of a big dinosaur track. They were found back in the 40s. Roland T. Byrd of the American Museum of Natural History made them famous, publishing them in Scientific American. And we can see a series of them, some of them three-toed, some of them the big elephant-size shaped sauropods. Some of them are a little strange. This one is three-dimensionally raised upward. Now, how did that happen? The track is supposed to push down, right? And what happened there is that this is infill. The track was made, another layer washed over it that hardened much harder and is more resistant to erosion, so that the infill stayed there and the other material eroded away. And that's important for several reasons that we'll look at later. But you also find tracks that look like that. Wait a minute, that's not supposed to be with the dinosaurs, is it? They're supposed to be 100 million years apart. Well, Stan Taylor was one of the ones who investigated that, decided, well, if they continue back up under the riverbank, here's two of them out in the river, and they're coming out from the bank, let's see if they go under the layers. There's about 6 feet of alternating clay, limestone, which he's moving away. And when he does, he sees that trail continuing back up under the overburden for a sequence of 12, which we later extended to 14. We look at a close-up and we see the mud push up around it. Erosion doesn't do that. This is what happens when you press a foot down and it pushes the mud up in some instances. The one that really convinced me, I was trying to play the devil's advocate. How could we explain that? This one, you have to look at it a minute, but this is the dinosaur track. That's about 25 inches, and they're consistent through the area. But look what steps right in the middle of it. Now that is all 5 toes and instep and heel, and it really upsets some folks. They're not supposed to be. They're right smack in the middle of a dinosaur track, a clear human track in a sequence of actually 14. I presented this at a science meeting up in Tennessee, and the fellow who had gotten Humanist of the Year for trying to explain this away really got upset, got on an airplane the next morning and was in the river with a big iron bar. 4 witnesses testified they saw him beating that track with an iron bar, and this is the way it looked when he got through with it. We do have stereo photographs. We've got casts and lots of good high-quality photographs, so he just documented the fact that this was evidence he couldn't put up with. Going further up the trail, we see another spot where he stepped in the dinosaur track. We see the 3 dinosaur toes in the anterior portion. Looking at a side view of that track, again to the right you can see the toes, and you can see the human that stepped in it. And when you put your foot in that, it's just molded, and it's perfect. Now, that one is a right. Directly in front of it is a left, and you see right, left for 14. Now, this is the way this track looked when it was first uncovered. By the next year, a little more erosion had occurred, and there was one beside it, not within or across, as they sometimes are, but here completely beside the 25-inch dinosaur track. The 11-inch human track is seen clearly there. Looking at this view, overview, and that was not an easy picture to take. My wife never got used to mopping the floor, the bottom of a riverbed. You can see the sandbags over on the left where this was about a month's work to clean that up and get it ready, but we're examining the bottom of a riverbed. The river has eroded down to the track, but you can see the human trail, right, left, going across the dinosaur trail. We analyzed it this way. All 14 have at least a general human shape, pretty consistent in length, more so than the dinosaurs. Some of the dinosaurs are still being revealed. 7 of them have clear toes, and that's really unusual when you're looking at fossil tracks. Miraliki's tracks over in Africa, none of them had individual. 2 of them had great toes. The others, the individual toes, you didn't see at all. You could distinguish right from left in 12 of the 14. We did a double-blind test at Kansas State University. Life-size photographs piled on the table. Psych students were asked, "What is this?" And 97% said they're human tracks, footprints. Then we got rough on them. Which ones are rights and which ones are lefts? Are we just seeing that? And 87% of them got that as we would say it should be, which is what we predicted, since 2 of them are just sort of oblong shapes. But all 14 of them are consistent. The rights are where the right ought to be, the lefts are where the lefts ought to be, consistent with that double-blind test. I think that's really powerful evidence. Sometimes you see erosion doing some strange things, just accidentally. It looks like the old man in the mountain. Or here's one over in Turkey that we took a picture of. You can imagine who they say that looks like. But Okay, erosion can do that. How would you distinguish that from something that wasn't erosion? Well, if you see four old men in the mountain, you got a pretty good idea that that's not something that happened naturally. Here we've got 14 in a right-left pattern. That's not produced by erosion. These are perfect turvy fossils. They're not intrusionally buried. You can't do that with footprints. They're not carved. They're excavated from under the overburden. Not erosion. You got right, left, right, left. That just is perfect. More so than the bones, which could be eroded and redeposited. Presented this to the University of Tennessee to about 50 grad students and the head of the department there. And it got kind of quiet when I finished. They all turned around and looked at the head of the department. What's he going to say about this? He said, well, we don't know that there weren't dinosaurs back there with human feet. And I said, well, I guess that's true. We also don't know that there weren't humans back there with dinosaur feet. Wouldn't that make about as much sense? Wouldn't it make more sense to say these things look like human feet made by humans, these things look like dinosaur feet made by dinosaurs? No, he wouldn't agree to that. And I said, well, if they were human tracks, would they look any different? And he got up and left. Chuck Finsley, who was curator of the Dallas Museum of Natural History, came down. He was wanting to display some of the dinosaurs we'd excavated. And he got upset and left. Came back because he really wanted those dinosaurs to display in Dallas. The third time he came back, he said, Dr. Patton, I've got your answer. I've decided what these are. I think these were made by aliens. And so you got a professor that says, here's dinosaurs with human feet, and another one that says aliens did it. Who do you think has the more reasonable scientific explanation? These things look like human feet. These things look like dinosaur feet. No, anything but that, because they're supposed to be 100 million years apart. I've suggested maybe they're alien dinosaurs with the footprints here. As long as you're dreaming something up, you don't have to be scientific, do you? The answer that we got more consistently is, well, you need more evidence. 14 and a right-left pattern usually is enough, but we continued to excavate the dinosaur trail and extended it to be the longest consecutive dinosaur trail on the American continent, over 500 feet of consecutive dinosaur tracks. The little arrow you see there is pointing to a little bitty fella who's not standing at the end of the trail. He's pointing around the corner to the end of it. And some of the tracks are just some of the most spectacular dinosaur tracks anywhere, with the long claws at the end. We know what dinosaur tracks look like. We excavated the longest trail on the American continent. Well, you need more evidence. So we continued to excavate just above where the fellow's standing at the end of the trail, the next platform, and sure enough, found another trail, about 94 dinosaur tracks on that platform, but right through the middle of it, this time a trail of 15 human tracks. Notice this close-up, there are actually two dinosaur tracks, different type dinosaur. This is more like the duckbill foot, but they're slightly raised. You see the two tracks, but then something stepped in the middle of the one on the right. We look carefully at it, and wow, that's a really clear track. Looking at a close-up of that track, we see the raised dinosaur track in the forepart, and then I don't think I have to tell you, I actually see the knuckles and the toes and it's in a sequence of 15 in a right-left pattern. And this lady here with the white hair is standing at the end of that trail, and was a big help. Shortly after that, I didn't find, another very significant find was made by a fellow who thought he had just had a dinosaur track that had broken off, and he picked it up and carried it home. And it was a couple of years later when he cleaned it up and saw, wow, there's something else besides that deep dinosaur track. Now, when you weigh 10 tons, you make better tracks, generally deeper. But still, clearly, at the end of that, that looks like a human track. And, well, the evolutionists said, wait, this can't be. That's just too good to be true. And I had to say, well, that's I understand that looks too good to be true. So we did a spiral CAT scan, cutting across like 300 slices to see if we could see indications down in the rock. And here, where the line is where you see the slice, and you see where the dinosaur toe fits, corresponds to the human toe fits. But look under the human toe, the contortions, the contours follow. If you were carving this, they would cut across the contours. Here, the contours follow. This is original impression in the sediment, and it's demonstrated both within and without. Now, that's powerful evidence. And if they're stepping in each other's footprints, just forget the idea they're 100 million years apart. That's not going to fly. But we have lots of evidence like that to show that humans and dinosaurs were not separated by 100 million years, but were created together. We traveled down to Peru, and this is Dr. Javier Cabrera, a very famous scientist who has passed away just a few years ago. He was 20 years head of his medical department at the University of Lima, performed the first heart transplant in Peru, and established two teaching hospitals, and then retired to be cultural anthropologist. His father had collected, in his youth, he had seen the stones from the Inca tombs, and we were able to go with him to some of those tombs. Very interesting. You see the baby there on the skirts of the mother. Evidently, if the mother died, that's time for the baby to die too. And they were buried together. We saw that several times. But there at the foot here, you see the stone. These were the burial stones where scenes were depicted, and we're looking at 1,500 to 2,000 years ago. These are the Inca burial stones. Looking at them, some of them are very artistically done, some rather crudely, but I don't have to tell you what that looks like, I don't think. It's especially interesting to notice the dermal frills, the pyramid along the back, because we didn't know when these were first found that those dermal frills were there. We found it in 1991, back when Mr. Sinclair did his dinosaur. They didn't know about it, and so you don't see the dermal frills, but there they are, accurately depicted, what we learned about actually in 92 when it was first published. He's collected over 11,000 of these burial stones, building on what his father had collected. About a third of them have dinosaurs on them, and some of them, again, very elaborate. And here's one with, let me back that up. You see the man in the foot of the dinosaur up in the upper right, with the man hanging kind of like Jurassic Park, but 2,000 years ago. This one is quite obvious. Different species of dinosaurs. Some of them different types of stones, different styles, some rather oriental looking, and some very artistic, some cartoonish. But a wide variety. The burial cloths that we found in the tombs wrapping the mummies often would have the dinosaurs on them. Here we see two more from the burial cloths, and we have some of those in our museum, both the stones and the cloths. And likewise, the pottery from the tombs has dinosaurs on them. That's easy to date both culturally and with thermoluminescent dating. This one was in the National Museum, circa 2,500 years is what the museum said. That's a turvy fossil. So we leave Peru, we go to Mexico, the Central Highlands, to Acámbaro. Dr. Dennis Swift, somebody was with me this a few minutes ago, and we got a message from him, totally unrelated to the presentation. But we made 6 trips over a 5-year period, and it was a real battle to be able to see these because they were kind of embarrassed that here was a collection of 33,000 figurines and they had dinosaurs in them, and so they couldn't be authentic from 4,000 years ago, which is what the cultural indication indicated. But over 2,000 of the 33,000 were of dinosaurs, and they were dated in various ways at about 4,000 years ago. They had them locked up in the back of the police station, and it took us a couple of trips down there to get back in there to them, and finally convinced them. You know, Spielberg convinced the world that dinosaurs were really neat, and everybody came to see his movie. You can beat Dinosaur City. So they spent a couple of $100,000 building a museum, and they're on display there. You can go see them in Acámbaro. But a turvy fossil. Obviously, a man did this. We didn't know that the brontosaurus stood up straight until Spielberg taught us that. They knew it 2,000 years ago. But any question what we're looking at here? Some of them, different styles. One of the art professors that went with me said there were at least 100 different artists that he saw indications of. This is my wife's favorite. You don't have to have a man in the picture to know that men were involved with the representations of dinosaurs showing that they lived together. I think that's powerful evidence. Then we go to France. Now, there are several places I go, Eastern Turkey, Cambodia. My beloved does not go with me for good reason. We fly into France, into Paris. Yep, she's ready to go. Here at the Louvre, she's standing out front. And inside, we see Sir George fighting with the dragon that looks a whole lot like a T-Rex, doesn't he? And many of them do. This one dates back to 1509. Here's one from 1470 in Germany. And there are dozens like this that sure look like dinosaurs. Interesting article recently in the BBC News, 10 things you didn't know about Georgia, and we won't look at all 10. We're going to look at a couple of them. There's no mistaking the link to St. George, a golden statue. Now, this is Georgia in Europe. Of the saint slaying the dragon, which looks a lot like a dinosaur, dominate Tbilisi's central square. Now, there is the central square, Freedom Circle, it's called, in the capital of Georgia, Tbilisi. And we went there to look at it, and yep, there it is. It's very obviously Sir George up there 60 feet in the air slaying a dinosaur. And that's how Georgia got its name. So where did we get our Georgia from? Well, that came from Europe. It's all about killing dinosaurs. People in Georgia don't know that. You look on the state seal, you see, yep, there he is, killing the dinosaur. The flag is the Crusader flag. Sir George was a Crusader, was killed in the Crusades, and that's why you have a Crusader flag for Tbilisi. No mistaking the link to St. George. It's also Georgia's patron saint, the national flag, and then Wikipedia points out, associated with St. George, depicted as a crusader from the late Middle Ages, and then go on and point out here's St. George's Day in England. And he isn't just the patron saint of England, he's the patron saint of Beirut, Bulgaria, Ethiopia, Georgia, Greece, Lithuania, Malta, Palestine, Portugal, Siberia, Venice. A lot of folks know about the one that was killing the dinosaurs, and they even have coins with him represented. This one is from Spain, just one of many. This one is from China, 4,000-year-old Chinese dinosaur. I have one of these in the museum. We traveled to southern France, and here is Chateau de Chambord. Over 700 dinosaurs carved on the walls of Chateau de Chambord. Here's one of them. Breathing fire, I don't know, maybe, kind of, looks like maybe. But we look up at the ceiling and we see it covered with dinosaurs, over 700 of them. Beautiful architecture, built in the 1300s. Here's one of the ceiling tiles compared with the Harvard Museum of Natural History's representation of Plateosaurus. Looks a lot like it. This one is over the fireplace at Chateau de Chambord. We traveled to another castle in southern France, Chateau de Bois, and it has the same dinosaur all over it. I didn't get a count, but you can see where the arrows go are all pointing to them. And in the throne room, there's the huge Flemish tapestry that dates to the 1200s, and you can see a dinosaur there in the middle of it. You compare that with Dracorex hogwartia that was found in 2007. I'm depicted here with Bob Bacher, who was the one who credited with finding Dracorex hogwartia and naming him. But you compare that with the tapestry and the head, yeah, looks like a dragon, doesn't it? This is the way he was represented and then named from Harry Potter's experience with Dracorex hogwartia. So in France, you've got dinosaurs. And go to England, you find this representation of Leonardo da Vinci's depiction of cats, lions, and a dragon. What does that look like? That's in Buckingham Palace. We look in the history books and we see Marco Polo traveling to China. He says the Emperor of China had dinosaurs. He didn't use that term. That term wasn't invented till 1841 by a creationist, by the way. He says the huge serpent's 10 paces in length. That's 50 feet. At the forepart near the head, they have 2 short legs with 3 claws, jaws wide enough to swallow a man. The teeth are large and sharp. Their whole appearance so formidable, neither man nor any kind of animal can approach them without terror. What does that sound like? Then we traveled to Cambodia, back up in the jungle near Siem Reap, and some of the largest temples ever built. Some of them just really magnificent, but destroyed almost 1,000 years ago. This is the Khmer Empire. And back in the jungle, we find Tapram, a Buddhist monastery that was dedicated in 1186. You travel through that door, make 2 rights, And you see just inside the stone walls covered with carvings almost every square inch. And maybe you can make that out. We'll look at a closer view. There's a dinosaur carved on the walls 1,000 years ago back in Cambodia. And if you show that picture to 10, 11-year-olds today, they'll say that's a Stegosaurus. Well, it's just more examples of the fact that co-occurrence of humans and dinosaurs. That somebody asked, well, were they on the ark? They had to be on the ark 1,000 years ago. And there are dozens of other examples post-flood that document dinosaurs. The implications are acknowledged by the evolutionist. Louis Jacobs, SMU, was president of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology when this statement was made, referring to humans and dinosaurs together. Evolution would be vanquished. Stephen Stanley, we quoted from earlier, Johns Hopkins, it would disprove evolution. And then Jerry Cones, the anti-creationist University of Chicago, it would be one of the ugly facts that would kill Darwinism if we find humans and dinosaurs together. Here's Richard Dawkins. He says evolution would be utterly destroyed. Evolution disproved. It would blow the theory of evolution out of the water. I think they know what they're talking about. That would be the implication, and you'll just have to decide if we have documented that. This is the model, not what you find when you dig down in the earth. It's the illustration of the thought, circular logic illustrated, to be tested. So we compare it with the real world, and we see contradiction after contradiction after contradiction that shows it does not represent man and human 100 million years apart, as that column would represent. That is demolished. Dawkins says just one fossil out of place would utterly destroy. We've got a whole lot more than one, don't we? I think that's the implication. I think they're exactly right. The facts test the hypothesis and falsifies. Nova came down to Glen Rose, and we were showing them the footprints. They got excited, the photographers. They thought there was earth-shaking evidence there, and I think for good reason. They went back. The editor would not print it. Did put out a short blurb called God, Darwin, and the Dinosaurs. This about 15-minute presentation saying there's nothing at Glen Rose that looks anything like a human footprint. Well, you can decide for yourself. Those were the things they photographed and found, and well, I think there's good evidence there. But what's the implication? Why would they turn that down? Finding them would counter evidence that humans evolved long after the dinosaurs became extinct and back up the claim that all species, including man, were created at one time. I think they're right. That's exactly what that would mean. And if we have documented that they did exist together, then that's exactly what it means. Totally consistent with the facts. And you see why it's fun to be a creationist. You just go with the facts. If you're here this evening and haven't confessed your faith in Jesus as God's Son, the book that describes this creation accurately and the flood, God's judgment, shows that he will not tolerate sin, and that if you have not washed your sins away by the blood of Christ, you're facing an eternity separated from God. Come confessing your faith, repenting of your sins, being baptized into Christ while we stand and sing.